Okay. Oh my goodness, I am fucking this up big time, aren't I? I wonder if I'm alive. Okay. Oh my goodness, I am fucking this up big time, aren't I? Wonder if I'm alive. I think it's working now. Okay. I'd hope so at least, but you can see this screen. No one's here. What's up, Mr. Fufu? I'm trying to set myself up on YouTube. Do you think you could go on YouTube and see if like I'm live or if it's working properly? Or even if you can hear me? Oh, okay, well. What's up? Okay. Hopefully nice. I think the YouTube live stream is working right now. We'll see. Go ahead. Open this up. From beginning. Oh, I guess he's having connection issues. Having trouble connecting there? Let me switch this. Oh, this is the worst, setting all this up. Let's see. Okay. And then display settings. There we go. Let's see if you guys can see that entire screen. Now, is that what YouTube sees? Or... I guess YouTube might just see this. Can't see or hear me. Oh no. Can you hear me now? Or see me now? What about now? Voice and video. Testing, testing, testing. I think the mic is working. Hopefully it is. I wonder if the YouTube lives. Okay, so they can see this screen more or less. Make it full screen. Okay. It's loading for now. Damn. Let's see what did that do anything? Maybe. Anything. Anything now? Can you hear me or see me now? I think it's not working because of because I don't know, I'm also doing live on YouTube at the same time. I might just have to opt in for YouTube then, unfortunately, and then I'll come back for the discussion. Default speakers, video. No. Yeah, I doubt that would do anything. Because I think I don't even know if if I can hear myself on YouTube. This stinks. I probably should have tried figuring this out before, huh? Oh my goodness, I stink. Oh, okay. Well, I guess as long as you can hear me on YouTube. I'm just gonna go YouTube all the way then. Sorry, Discord. Here, I'm gonna go ahead and just set myself up for YouTube only. Yeah, here, okay. I mean, I hope this is what all of you guys are seeing. I can't see the chat or anything. I guess I'll have my phone out in case anyone wants to say anything in the chat from beginning. Okay. This is as good as it gets. Okay. I guess I'll just go ahead and do the little presentation here on YouTube, and then I'll move over to Discord once it's over, and we can talk about it there, if anyone feels like that. But I guess I'll go ahead and get started and hope the stream kind of works out and everything continues the way it is. But today, or this week, for book club, we've chosen a book finally. We've just been doing papers in the past couple of weeks. You know, we've been doing antinatalism, consciousness, things by Chalmers, things by Peter Singer, but we finally kind of like voted on a book, chose a book, and that one was Hume's Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. A really, really famous text, something that you would probably read in most undergraduate classes in philosophy or something like that. And so the plan is to kind of go section by section. I think today I mistyped that we're doing the first 4 sections today, which isn't very much. It's like 10 pages, maybe 12 pages of reading. And it's all free online if you guys want to follow along with us or talk more about it in the Discord, but basically I'm just going to be giving a summary and overview, just like normally. And then yeah, we'll talk a little bit about objections, the points that he makes, and so on and so on. But very, very simply, Hume is kind of setting out on a quest with this book and trying to figure out how the mind operates and what faculties the mind has for operating, the type of like capacities that it has. And so he starts off with kind of defining or talking about philosophy and the types of philosophy that people back then, and to be very, very honest, people nowadays still like find themselves trying to understand. So if you ask the common person, the average person, what philosophy is, they'll say something along the lines of wisdom that helps you make better decisions in life, or that helps you live a better life, right? So it's this type of thing that's like focused around being able to act in certain ways. It's a very like beautiful thing, maybe almost even a poetic thing. Philosophy in day-to-day life is thought to be something that's very artistic almost. Like if you ask someone who's your favorite philosopher, the odds are they're going to point to a writer and say, Dostoevsky, or Franz Kafka, right? They'll say these names, saying these are very philosophical people. But David Hume, he says that there's a bit of a divide between what philosophy is for the mere philosophers and then for the ignanimous philosophers. But what I'm calling them here is the philosophers of action, right? So he says, okay, there's two types of philosophies. The philosophy of action, and this is the one that sounds nice to the ear, that's poetic, that leads you to act in certain ways. It's kind of like a way to live your life pragmatically and beautifully. And so this is the very, very popular kind. And he even admits that it's probably the more useful kind, right? It's the kind of philosophy that can help you live a better life and be happier and so on. So he says there's this type of philosophy, right? The philosophy of action. But there's also a philosophy of theory, right? And this one doesn't have that clear of a tie or connection with day-to-day life. This type of philosophy of theory, it has to do a lot with like abstract concepts, with mental attitudes, with metaphysics, with theory, right? The applications aren't very pragmatic, right? Thinking about like the theory of forms that Plato kind of like outlines in his early works, like this isn't gonna change too much, at least too clearly, how you live your day-to-day life. But what he appreciates about this type of philosophy, this philosophy of theory, is that it's very, very precise, right? And that it doesn't get things wrong. He kind of like jabs a little bit at the philosophers of action and says, well, they're not very precise when you read their poetry and their verses and their very beautiful sentences. They'll oftentimes miss certain points or not value certain objections, and they'll kind of like gloss over ideas and topics. And Hume is saying that, if we want to understand fundamental truths about reality or about the mind, we need to be very, very precise about it. We need to be systematic about it. And so that's what he is attempting to do. That's like his focus in this book. It's to kind of concern ourselves only with philosophy of theory, not philosophy of action, like was very, very common back then and even now today. He kind of comes up with I think like a pretty helpful analogy. He says, well, think about the philosopher of theory as kind of like the anatomist, right? Someone who is able to understand the eye in the most systematic and literal way, right? Like understanding it in terms of the cornea and then the lens and the pupil and the retina and how the cones are aligned in a certain way and they're sending things like signals down the optic nerve and so on and so on and so on. So he says, think about that type of anatomist, that type of like scientific and precise study of things, like the mere philosopher, the philosopher of theory. And he says, the philosophers of theory, they're still useful and practical because, well, one, they're kind of figuring out the innate, the literal truths and like very like systematic truths about the eyeball, or about like the mind in this case. and it's still helpful for other people, for like a painter, right? So a painter still needs to understand what type of colors might go together, how they might be like appealing. Or imagine he's trying to paint the eyeball. He needs to know where the pupil is and how that looks, and like the iris and the lines and stuff like that. So he's trying to make a case here that the theoretical philosopher, or the mere philosopher, is what he calls it, isn't a totally useless thing for pragmatic um, cases, or in pragmatic cases. When we're very, very accurate and precise about the nature of things, it ends up helping beauty, right? And just like he says there, accuracy always helps beauty, and solid reasoning always helps delicate sentiment. It would be pointless to praise one by depreciating the other. So he's saying, let's focus a little bit on the precise nature of understanding things and be a little less hand-wavy, a little less fluffy about fundamental truths. And so the goal, like I just kind of said, is to, or in this book, is to understand all of the possible functions that the human mind has. We all know that the human mind is kind of like special in certain ways, right? It's able to do things that ordinary other objects aren't able to do. And he wants to be able, at the very, very least, to kind of understand our mental geography, he calls it. So if he's able to kind of like separate the mind in terms of this is where reasoning happens, this is where imagination happens, this is where the will is, if he's able to get anywhere close, anywhere like in that ballpark of understanding the mind, then it was a success. We did something. So normally when we think about the capacities of the human mind or capacities of human reasoning, some common ones are things like the will. Like, I have the will to go get water, or to understand things. If you want to understand a concept, there's like a part of your brain doing some funky work. Or if you're imagining the future, or imagining something that happened, so long, or as well as like your passions, like if you have a desire for eating chocolate or going out on a date with this person. I mean, these are like aspects of the mind that are very, very clear and obvious, that everyone agrees that we have. Everyone agrees that we have imagination, or capacities for imagination. So he's like, this is how like most people understand the mind, but I want to understand the mind in a much more precise and systematic way. So that's his goal, essentially. And that's section 1. He introduces the moral philosopher, or the philosopher of action, versus the theoretical philosopher. And then speaks a little bit about the goal, this project that he's going towards. So he brings up another analogy when we're trying to understand the mind and its capacities, right? We just kind of said that there's very obvious capacities like that of imagination, that of will, that of understanding, but there are finer ones and maybe less obvious capacities that the mind has that we need to pay equal attention to, right? So he's saying that when he's writing this, at least, he's saying that people have somewhat of an understanding of the mind, but not a very precise and fine one. And he kind of brings up the analogy of saying, well, think about like astronomers, and how they discovered, thanks to Galileo, that maybe they were orbiting each other and they were moving around in certain ways, that there's other planets out there, there's stars out there in the universe, and so on and so on. And that to him was like a general understanding of the skies and celestial bodies. But then came Newton, and he was able to apply seemingly universal laws to all of those bodies, even though they were all, far away from each other and of different kinds. He's setting out here to understand fundamental laws and fundamental principles of the mind, or of human reasoning. Whereas before, we just had general ideas of how the mind was working. Maybe we had the passions for some things, imagination for some things, and it's just like a very general, broad thing. He wants to be the Newton of the mind in a way. He wants to understand the mind in a very fine, a very systematic, and elegant way, right? So what's to say that philosophers can't discover the laws of the mind in the same way Newton discovered the laws of the planets? And that's kind of what he's pushing in the first section. And so he's like, okay, let's do this. Let's start researching. Let's see if we can come to certain truths about the mind through this theory, or through this ability to abstract things. He says, still better if by reasoning in this easy manner I can undermine the foundations of an obtruse philosophy. Obtruse philosophy being that type of like hand-wavy, poetic, very like flowery philosophy that people normally consider philosophy. So wouldn't it be nice to kind of undermine the foundations of that stuff, of the shaky stuff, with some realness, with some rigor? And so then comes one of his first point really in the book, and that's where ideas come from. So he sets off with making a distinction, right? A really clear distinction. That being that there are two types of things that reasoning is capable of, or that perception that we are able to perceive. We are able to perceive thoughts and ideas. He kind of uses that term interchangeably. He uses ideas, but we can also just call them thoughts. And he thinks that these thoughts are somewhat faint things. They're faint perceptions of which we're conscious when we think about our impressions. So it's like if I asked you to, I don't know, think about a unicorn, or think about your mom. You're able to kind of conjure up that image or that thought of your mom, but it's still a little bit faint. It's not as real as if you were looking at your mom face to face in the eyes and like receiving that sensory information. So he's saying that everything in the world that we experience is either a thought or an idea, kind of like something we conjure up, or an impression. And an impression might be something closer to like a sensation or something sensory, in more like in more contemporary like jargon or lingo. Everything we can smell, see, hear, feel, immediately want, like the visceral things, the very, very lively perceptions that we have, that these are impressions. So we have like a vague, opaque, loose and like fleeting things, thoughts, some faint things that we're able to kind of hold in our minds, but the more real and current impressions that we have. And so keeping that in mind, he thinks that, well, at face value, if we just consider what a thought is, it seems like our minds are able to go anywhere, right? If we can hold these thoughts in our mind, we can think of we can think up of almost anything. Then it would seem like the mind is like this super, like this. It has like this superpower, this crazy ability. Like I can, like right now, I can imagine a unicorn, right? Something that doesn't really exist. I can imagine of a tsunami wave that is 50 meters tall, or of dinosaurs roaming the earth. And at face value, this would seem like the mind has this amazing ability to kind of go back in time, forward in time, through dimensions, and do all this crazy funky stuff. You can think of things that are very, very unlikely even. You can think of being the president or speaking 20 languages. You think of flying across the ocean. So it's almost like the mind has this unbound power when it comes to what we can think up of. Except for one thing, though. Contradictions. So nothing is beyond... So the mind has this crazy power to kind of think in any direction, and temporally or spatially. But it cannot do one thing. It cannot think of a contradiction. And an example of thinking of a contradiction would be like, okay, try for a second to think of a round square. I dare you. Of a square that has 4 perfect sides, all at 90 degrees to each other, but is round somehow. These are types of contradictions, things that our minds can't apprehend of. So there's something that the thought or the mind is incapable of. Even though it seems completely unbounded, it is constrained. And one of those restraints, one of those like guardrails, if you want to call them that, are contradictions. And so thoughts are a little bit limited, is kind of where he's heading at. I was saying that you can kind of think up of crazy things, right? Like of Pegasus. He uses the example of a golden mountain. So obviously think of a golden mountain, boom, I'm thinking of a golden mountain. So he's saying, yes, we're completely able to have these thoughts of things that might not be real or might not be out there in reality. But what we're doing isn't necessarily thinking up of something totally new. What we're doing is combining, transposing, or enlarging certain types of sensory experiences that we've already had. You've probably at one point in your life or another seen the color yellow or seen something gold, and you've probably at one point or another seen a mountain or a picture of a mountain at least, and we can take up those ideas, those thoughts, put them together, mix them around, and now all of a sudden we have this idea of a golden mountain. So he starts to build an argument from this point on. He says all of our ideas are, or more feeble perceptions, are copies of our impressions, or more lively ones. So, for example, when I see this, what is this? This is my wallet right in front of my face. This is a very vivid, lively perception I'm having right now. Now, if I put it away and I think up of it, now it's become a thought. It's a bit more feeble. It's fleeting. And so his argument goes kind of as follows. First premise is, whenever we analyze any complex or elevated idea, we always find it composed of simple ideas. So something like a golden mountain is composed of two simples: goldness and mountainness. Every simple idea in such combinations was copied from an earlier feeling or sensation, an impression, a vivid thing. So the reason we're able to think up of a goldenness or mountainness is because at one point or another we have seen or seen a picture of or seen the real mountain, or seen a picture of or seen the real gold. And only because we've been able to see those things before are we able to kind of conjure up those thoughts. And so therefore every complex or elevated idea can be traced back to simple ideas, right? Or to certain copies of those impressions. So all ideas, even the craziest, most far out ones, he talks about, for example, the existence of God, is ultimately something that's derived from impressions. He's suggesting here that maybe something as divine and something as metaphysical as God is really just us having simple thoughts and then expanding them or enlarging them. Maybe the figure of like a father or the figure of a president, and then we expand it as much as we can. Now we have the idea of God. Or things like the idea of Pegasus. Really, it's just like a horse, and then magic, and then a horn, and then we put those things together, and now we get this idea of a Pegasus. But the only way we're able to do any of that is because we have, at one point or another in our lives, seen something, had vivid, lively impressions of something that we're able to kind of mix up in our minds and then have a thought of. And that's what he's saying here. That's his argument. He then comes up with another argument to support this framework, this kind of idea. And it's, consider someone who has lost an ability, lost like a sensation, an ability to feel something. So someone that's blind, for instance. If someone was born blind and had never seen the color blue, then even if the sensory capacity is restored, or the relevant experience is had, the corresponding ideas end up becoming available, right? So even if you didn't have the thought or the ability to conceive of blue before because you were blind, but then you at one point became not blind and you were able to see it, you can still acquire that stuff again. And now he's saying, in virtue of that train of thought, the same dependence of ideas on prior impressions holds for inner feelings and passions. So those who have not felt a passion cannot form its corresponding idea. Someone who's never been in love can appropriately hold the thought of being in love, at least to the same extent that someone who actually has felt it has. Therefore, the presence of an idea depends on prior experience, impressions of the corresponding sensation or feeling. Another way of saying, you need to have experienced something to be able to hold that thought in your head, or to have an idea of that thing. Someone who's never seen blue cannot hold blue in their minds. You need to have seen blue to have the feeling of blue. But there's another color objection. I guess he really liked colors for some reason. But his colors objection goes along the lines of, okay, well, now imagine you're someone who has perfect sight, perfect vision. And you have, seen most of the colors out in the world, and then I show you like a spectrum of, colors going from like darkest blue to lightest blue, right? So one specific shade of blue. A person familiar with all of the colors, except one specific shade of blue in this spectrum, notices a blank when shown a gradual sequence of blue. So what ends up happening if we notice that, like, okay, it's going from very light blue to light blue to very dark blue. There's like, we're missing a kind of dark blue, right? So someone who has seen all the types of colors, they're able to like imaginatively fill that missing hole. We're able to like imagine almost the missing shade even if we've never perceived it. So this is kind of an objection to his views before. It's like, maybe you didn't have to have an experience of something in order to hold that thought in your mind. If you've seen most of the colors and you now see a spectrum and there's a missing part of it, and you can imagine that missing part, then maybe you never had to have the one-to-one experience or the sensory experience of that shade of color to end up to have that, to be able to have that thought of that color. And so, after kind of establishing that basic stuff, he talks a little bit about how ideas then can mix up in the brain. Because obviously, when we are talking about things like a golden mountain, these are two simple ideas, or some could argue like lots of simple ideas, but they're two simple ideas that mix up and become one. And so he says, how do they do that? Well, they do that primarily in three ways. In terms of resemblance, right? So if two things can resemble each other, then we can kind of come up with a thought. Like a horse kind of resembles a unicorn, so we can think up of a unicorn. Contiguity, or what might come next, is another version of how we can make these associations in our mind. So for example, if I said, okay, let's think of a number. Let me think of a number. Okay, the number like 1001. The only reason I'm able to think up of this number 1001 is because at one point I have thought of or had the impression of the number 1000. And what comes after 1000? 1001. Right? So because I have the idea of 1000, now I can think up of 1001. Might not be the best example, but whatever. This is all improvised. And then the next one is in terms of cause and effect. So we can come to understand how we can have these ideas of things, these complex ideas of things, through the nature of cause and effect. So if I were to grab this lighter and burn my finger here, and I just saw a burned finger or something like that, I would be able to infer that, okay, there must have been a burn before, there must have been fire before. And this relationship of this burning my finger, that gives me some degree of manipulability in my mind to kind of understand the ideas and the concepts of burning and fire and fingers. And so this is where he kind of departs on his super famous like what Hume is basically known for. And he says, okay, well, we can come to understand two things. There's two lines of reasoning, essentially. One is demonstrative truths, or what he calls relations of ideas. And so these relations of ideas, they're the type of things you can know without ever having experiences, right? So even if you've been blind your whole life, you can probably understand that 1 + 1 = 2. Or that, like his example, that 3 times 5 equals the half of 30. It kind of rubs me the wrong way when they make things more complex. Like, why do you have to say the half of 30 instead of 15? But whatever. So he says, yeah, like these demonstrative truths are relations of ideas, and we can reason in this way. This is one of the ways we reason and we come to understand stuff. The falsehood of any of this type of reasoning would imply contradictions and known a priori. So if there's a contradiction, like a round square, we would be able to figure out that there's a contradiction just by thinking about it, just by sitting in our chair. We don't need to see anything out in the world. We just need to know the concept of a square, know the concept of a circle, and then understand by thinking, by this type of reasoning, through relations of ideas, that it is a contradiction for there to be a round square. That's one way of reasoning. The other one, the more common one, the one that most people live their lives by, honestly, and like you and me live their lives by, and I definitely do, like at every corner, is this matter of fact. In terms of this matters of fact, or these empirical truths, might be more easy to understand. And so these empirical truths are truths about the world that we've come to understand through our experiences and through our perceptions, through these vivid and lively things. And his famous example is that the sun will rise tomorrow, right? Other things would be like fire is hot or candy tastes good. These things are true because we've experienced them at some point, and that gave us some confidence. So their contraries are conceivable and not contradictory. So one key thing here to keep in mind is that I'm using the word contradiction in a very philosophical sense, right? So in philosophy, a contradiction is only a logical contradiction, right? So for example, saying that I win a gold medal in the Olympics, it's not really a contradiction. That's possible, it's just incredibly unlikely. But when we're talking about matter of fact and empirical truths, technically speaking, their contraries are perfectly conceivable, perfectly possible, not contradictory. The sun not rising tomorrow is a real possibility, even though it's very, very unlikely, and no one would, or most people would say, no, it's definitely going to rise tomorrow. I know that it's going to rise tomorrow. These things are not established by demonstration, and they require something a little bit beyond pure thought, right? You need experience, and empirical validation and verification to have these kinds of knowledge or this type of reasoning. And so how we ordinarily infer matters of fact goes along these lines, basically. We infer things that will happen in the future by things that are currently real. And we appeal to that through the nature of cause and effect. So for instance, if you receive a letter and it says France on it, then it's perfectly fine to infer that the friend is in France, right? He sent that letter from France. Or imagine you hear sounds of speech. It's perfectly fair to infer that a person is present. At least these are the examples he uses. We understand the world in terms of cause and effect, and we make those connections and those ties. But he's encouraging us, he's inviting us here in sections 3 and 4 to be a little bit skeptical and to kind of let's play like devil's advocate, basically. So let's take a look at certain things certain matters of fact that we hold very, very firm, but let's look at them very, very skeptically for a quick second. And so if you do that, you'll find out that there is no a priori discovery of these causal powers. You can't deduce an object's cause and effects only by examining its sensible qualities. Like, knowledge that comes from experience is not the same as pure reasoning. So, for example, the knowledge that you have that the sun will rise tomorrow is from experience. It's not necessarily from for sure reasoning. You can't say with certainty that the sun will rise tomorrow. You can only say based off of experience of yesterday, the day before that, and it's always risen. From this experience, you can say that you have knowledge of the sun rising every morning. But there's no real 100% deducible logic that says that the sun must rise tomorrow morning. The faculties of reason can't really reveal the necessary connections. This is just like another way of saying that the effect that we always see out in the world is always distinct from its cause. So cause and effect are two distinct things. Nothing about the cause logically contains the effect, right? So even though they might seem related, they're not necessary entailments. Because it could be a different way. It could be the fact that there's no sun, the sun doesn't rise tomorrow. There's no necessary connection between those two things, is what Hume is saying here. And so the last thing, or the conclusion to this type of understanding of matters of fact, is that just through reason, we cannot justify inference from past instances in conjunction with future occurrences. And unfortunately, this is basically all of science. If we take this idea and we take it seriously, then we need to unfortunately conclude that the laws of nature, everything we understand about cause and effect, You know, everything you think that you know about facts of the world because you've experienced them, they're not purely justifiable. They're not justifiable through reason. That's not good enough. It's only through this inference, which is a little bit weaker than reason, that you're able to justify them. Uh-oh, says the people who kind of believe that we can know things. The skeptic kind of like pushes you into a corner here. Hume puts you in a corner. But he tries to remind us for a second that, well, it's not skepticism about absolutely everything in like the Cartesian sense, like, oh no, do I even exist? Type of skepticism. It's only skepticism about empirical knowledge, right? So the fact that 1 + 1 = 2, that knowledge is safe for Hume. You don't need to worry about that stuff, since you don't need experience to back that up. You just need a priori reasoning. Other things, though, like saying the sun will rise tomorrow, if you're relying on experience, then all of a sudden it gets shaky. It doesn't work just as well. Because he thinks that cause and effect is just this psychological bias that we have. I've always seen in my life that if I spill water or if I tilt water bottles upside down, then water will, go on the ground and my pants will get wet because something caused that effect to happen. But that's just like a little shortcut my mind has taken to understand the rules of stuff falling over and stuff getting wet. There's no necessity to water spilling and something getting wet. That's just a psychological bias. It just happens to have been the case that every time in the past when I've poured water, it's spilled and gone on the floor or something like that. These are like truths that have always been the case, like instances that have always been the case, but I can't guarantee you through reason that they will keep happening, right? I cannot pinky promise you with 1,000,000% certainty that if I pour this on the ground will get wet, at least according to Hume. And that's basically all I had to say for sections 1 to 4, sorry. Next week, if you guys want to join up, I'll try and figure out how to have my Discord going at the same time. But yeah, we'll do what, like the next, let me take a look. What would be like a reasonable, we can do sections 5 is long enough. I think that's where he talks 6. Okay, we can do like 5 to 7. Yeah, sure. 5 to 7. We'll do sections 5 to 7 for next Sunday, same time. And hopefully I'll see some of you guys there. I'll try and set up the live stream on YouTube as well. I don't even know if anyone was watching, maybe not, but oh well. An entire 3 of you. Hell yeah. Okay, bye.